let me begin by asking a question that I think you get from everybody, and that is, you have seen India's economic story unfold, and you've had a front bench experience of it as an author, as an economic journalist. When I talk to you about Viksit Bharat, or when an average young person talks to you about Viksit Bharat, beyond the slogan, what does it truly mean to you?
Thank you very much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to talk to young people and also some eminent voices of Indian thought leadership. I think the idea of Viksit Bharat is probably not understood in its right context. When we talk about Viksit, what do we mean? We need to understand it, and I have often wondered, what does it really mean? Does it really mean India's size of the economy becoming that of a developed country? Or does it mean that our per capita income will reach the level of whatever it is, $12,000 or $15,000 per capita? There is a tendency in popular discourse that Viksit Bharat means India becoming the third largest economy and becoming a size of the economy which, if you translate that into whatever per capita level and everything, will reach there. My understanding of Viksit is not just that. I think we need to be Viksit without being unequal. Unfortunately, at this stage, I don't get inspired by this extreme lack of inequality, which is actually a big constraint in our becoming Viksit. And I don't think policy reforms are adequate at this point in time to address that inequality, to make India a truly Viksit Bharat by 2047. There are estimates of whether it's an 8% growth or a 9% growth that will take us to that level of being a Viksit. But I think there are many other parameters, and one of the big parameters is how unequal we remain when we become Viksit. Now, you might argue that the US is also unequal, but certainly US is less unequal than India at this point in time. And one data point, which is available with the latest numbers, coming from, if I'm not mistaken, from the government estimates only, which is that just 10% of India's population has got a 58% share in India's total income. I'm not talking even about the wealth. Wealth, I think it is larger. So if 10% of the Indian economy people have a share of 58% of income, it does constrain India's growth potential. Why? Because I think what happens is that a small cohort of people are becoming the market. 90% of the people are not really the market. So they also don't contribute to the kind of demand sustenance that is necessary. So if we cannot change that equation by making sure that their participation of if not 10%, if not 50%, 60%, at least 30%, 40%, we will not be able to sustain this growth. And that is one big worry. And the consequent to that worry is that how we are seeing a gradual demise of entrepreneurship. I know we talked about startups, but I think the sons and daughters of India's business leaders are not showing the kind of skill in entrepreneurship as they are showing in their skills in financialization of the economy. Everybody is becoming a financial investor, and I'm not opposing the idea of financialization, but what I'm saying is this: that if just 10% of that population is actually indulging in more financial investments, you are not really contributing the kind of growth that you need to become a Viksit Bharat.
Thank you for putting that in context and very beautifully so. So we are debating, of course, growth versus inclusion. And I think that is where the big hurdle lies on how do we make India more inclusive, how do we ensure a more equitable distribution of wealth. And in your assessment to that point, has India managed to find a balance between market reforms and social welfare? Because that's also a problem that many states face and the center has also faced over years. Market reforms versus social welfare. Or do you think we lean too far in one favor?
I think what has happened is that our reforms have been more driven by crises. Whenever we have been in crises, we have gone in for reforms. And that regret is that in spite of the so-called 35 years or 36 years of reform story, we have not embraced reforms through a consensus-based approach. What we have done is that if there is a crisis, we immediately go in for reforms. If there is Mr. Trump, we start talking about tariff reforms. Now, till all this while, 2017 onwards, nobody was talking about tariff reforms in this country. Nobody was talking about engaging with the world through proper agreements on investment and trade. Nobody was talking about encouraging more foreign investment into this country so that, so I think just because Mr. Trump is now giving us some trouble, we are going in for tariff reforms. Something similar happened in 1991 when we are in dire straits, balance of payment problem, the fiscal indiscipline. So we went in for those major reforms. So I think we need, and the nation has failed itself by not creating a body of opinion which suggests that reforms have to be a continuous process. So when you talked about market reforms, I think we have been very, very slow and we have been very partial. And even if you look at the latest bit of reforms on the labor codes, now are these reforms what we wanted? Of course we wanted them, but if you look at the incrementality of it, I do not know at what point it will start bearing fruit. We still are not far away from our land reform. We had the agricultural reforms, but we rolled them back. There is no reason why agricultural reform cannot be rolled out once again.
Okay.
So I think market reforms are not getting the kind of importance by the policymakers as it should. On the contrary, social welfare schemes are getting the kind of support from government that was once talking about questioning about revenues. Now, if you look at the kind of assembly election that we have seen, we are all seeing that the revenues are being given in different forms, and there's a fight over revenues. So I think
who can give them more?
Revenue is essentially social welfare.
Exactly. So who gives more revenues?
Exactly. So therefore, or who tries to empower the woman more with more money, not by creating capacity, but by transferring cash. So I think our social welfare has been used for electoral purposes, and our market reforms have not gained the kind of momentum that we need to actually keep and realize the potential of this country.
AKB, what would you tell those naysayers or those people who will often cite the fact that the government did roll out agriculture reforms but was forced to take it back given the complexity of India's democracies? It becomes hard to implement reforms. As you rightly pointed out, labor reforms, not there yet. Agriculture reforms taken back, rolled back. And so therefore, reforms only kick in when we are in dire straits because we have no other alternative. And that is to do with how complex India's democracy is.
Well, I don't think it is very complex. I'm sorry, I'm disagreeing with you a little bit. I think we often underestimate the importance of process in undertaking reforms. Take the example of agricultural reforms. They were well-intentioned. But I think, did we follow the right process? I don't think we followed the right process.
So you think we missed the process of
the
consultation?
The process is because what we thought was that because of the COVID time, we can ram down a reform without proper consultation, discussion, taking people on board. COVID time was not a crisis time, in a crisis of a different nature, but not crisis for the country.
Right.
So, but the government in its wisdom thought that, well, this is an opportunity for me to just ram it down the throats of the people. And a small section, mind you, Western UP, Punjab and Haryana. The rest of the country was absolutely fine with those agricultural reforms.
That's right.
So just small segment of people were politically more vocal. They managed to bring that down. Now, could the government have said that, let's have discussion, let's have give and take? Reform is also about, a kind of a give and take. You give some and take some. I don't think that was impossible. So I think in reform, you have to understand the importance of process. And I'm sorry to say that this importance has not been fully recognized by not just this government, but even in the previous governments.
So backdoor creeping in of bills as opposed to stakeholder consultation, perhaps that is what led to eventual rollback of agricultural reforms. And on reforms, from 1991, and since you've tracked reforms very closely in your books, I have to ask you, what, in your assessment, were the biggest reforms that have set India on a developmental path?
Well, I think what did we see in 1991? We saw some trade policy reform, we saw fiscal policy reform, we saw financial sector reform, and that took us some distance. And I think the successive governments, all coalition governments, carried on that reform. But did we do the factor market reforms? No, we did not. We did not. I mean, the finance minister who brought about those fundamental changes in economic policies in 1991 himself announced that our government will never introduce an exit policy in a country like India. Now, that was the end of the story for labor market reforms. So they were taken up how many years later? In 2020. And 2020, the laws were passed. Once again, during COVID time, little consultation. But then there were groundswell of protest. So it took about 5 years of consultation, backroom, and I'm aware of it, that how the Labour Ministry worked with the trade unions and different state trade unions also. And today we have situation, something that should have been done in state 1991 was thought of in 2020, and it took about another 5 years to bring about this labor codes. But is it too little, too late? I don't know.
It is too late indeed, if not too little, very late, as a matter of fact. Now, I have to ask you, you've talked also about in your books, although I did not have time to read all of them, I tried as much as I could. You've talked about bureaucratic complexity. This government has also talked about red tapeism. Now, in your assessment, do you believe in the last 10 years, have we moved towards perhaps a simpler, less bureaucratic administration? Or do you think we have a very long road ahead of ourselves when it comes to, the red tapeism with our bureaucracy?
I was just talking about it with Mr. Gurucharan Das. One of the areas where the Modi government has not taken progressive steps. On the contrary, they have actually fallen back on that yardstick, is civil services reforms. Although there were hopes that civil services reforms will take place at a good pace because the Prime Minister was seen as interacting with the bureaucracy. But unfortunately, I don't see civil service reforms have just moved even an inch. On the contrary, what I do find is that the bureaucratic stranglehold over governance processes have only increased. So, to such an extent that, currently your entire financial sector regulatory system is governed and led by a team of bureaucrats which presented last budget. So, I mean, you might say that, oh, it's a great jugalbandi that's going on, that the economic affairs secretary is the insurance sector regulator, the revenue secretary is the RBI governor, and the finance secretary is the markets regulator, SEBI. You may say it's a great achievement, but do you really believe that a civil servant who has got strong connection with the government can actually act as an independent regulator? He needs to take decisions
and regulate the government.
Regulate this thing. You have a payments regulator, and in the payments regulator, apart from the RBI governor, you have two other regulators who are serving bureaucrats. You have DGCA, which is supposed to be an independent, statutorily empowered civil aviation regulator. But you go into the website, you will find that DGCA is described as an attached office of the Civil Aviation Ministry. Now, what does it tell you? That we have brought about reforms, we have got about market reforms, so to say, but we have still remain under the stranglehold of the civil servants who decide that who should be the regulator, and it is a very good posting for the most civil servants. After retirement or just a couple of years before retirement, you become the regulator. Good old days, they used to be sent to the IMF and the World Bank as executive director, but these days they are sent to as a regulatory chairman.
So not very subtle there when it comes to moving
Absolutely.
from one plush position to another plush position. But I have to ask you, going back to the 3 books that you've written on India's finance minister and tying it in with what you said, you have chronicled the journey of India's finance ministers. Which finance minister, in your assessment, has done the best job at it? I'm not asking you to rate them, but perhaps which finance minister, when you chronicle their journey, stood out when it came to reforms, when it came to ensuring that there is more transparency, that there is more division of power, and an organization that in a way lives up to the expectation, as you pointed out, where a economic or a revenue secretary ends up heading perhaps an RBI, or a regulator ends up operating out of a ministry's own compound. So in your assessment, which of these finance ministers, if one or two, if you could name them, in your assessment stood out when it comes to doing a good job with Indian economy?
Well, this is not a very difficult question at all, because I think if you look at the last 28 or 25 finance ministers that India has seen so far, who have presented a budget each, at least, I think Manmohan Singh stands out, very clearly. There cannot be any doubt about it, for good reasons. Because one is what he did those 100 days after 1991 crisis hit us, but also because for the next 4 years, in spite of huge political pushback, he maintained and personal attack on him on the Harshad Mehta security scam. He's stuck to his broad philosophy of unshackling the economy. But I think the real answer, another way of looking at is, who is the most underappreciated finance minister? And I think that underappreciated finance minister is Yashwant Sinha.
Okay.
Because that person, with a prime minister who was not always by his side, and please remember that a finance minister is as successful as he gets the support from the prime minister. I mean, Manmohan Singh wouldn't have been what Manmohan Singh was without a Prime Minister like Narasimha Rao. But Yashwant Sinha, who did not enjoy his full support of his Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, managed to bring about the kind of reforms. I think people don't appreciate him enough.
Okay. Now, at the beginning of the conversation, you've set the stage for what are the challenges when it comes to Viksit Bharat. Let me also bring in some of the contemporary challenges that we were talking about. That includes, technology flux, global supply chain disruption. We're looking at, a decadal shift when it comes to AI, what AI can do, how it's going to take away jobs. So, given all the present constraints, what is the sustainable path forward to a Viksit Bharat?
I think I'm not really competent to answer this very, very deep question of yours, but let me try. I think we have to understand that we haven't paid enough attention to what I call broadly social infrastructure. What do I mean by social infrastructure? I mean by health, by education, and I would include even water there. And these days, since I'm coming from Delhi, I would say air pollution. Now, I think these are all social infrastructure that we have failed to create. And our failure to create strong social infrastructure in these areas of health, education, including skilling and reskilling, and water and air, we may continue to grow. As with India's demographic dividend being what it is, till 2040, 6% growth is par for the course. So it's important that we pay more attention to these 3-4 areas of social infrastructure and make sure that the biggest challenge is what, in my view, in a country which is for the last 40 years or so, we have seen there is no formalization of the economy as far as workforce is concerned. In India, still 10% of its population of workforce is formal, 90% informal, out of which 48% in agriculture, overpopulated, over-dependent on agriculture. So we must create avenues by which we make greater formalization, and 2, we take away people away from agriculture, maybe through skilling, through education, and divert them to the industrial sector, where, as Mr. Gopalkrishnan was pointing out, we still have around 12 to 15% of our economy is industry.
Okay. We've talked a lot about what needs to change. I also want to know from you, what are you most optimistic about? Having tracked India's development journey for the last 4 decades, and I'm assuming many, many more decades to come, what in your assessment makes you most optimistic about India's growth story? Because it's something that every financial institution in the world is talking about. India, the beacon of shining light at the end of the tunnel, an economy that stands out, that continues to be resilient, one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. And I believe all of those are headlines, and as Rakesh pointed out, we love to churn out headlines in the media. Yeah. But when you deeply study some of these economic transitions, what makes you most optimistic about India's growth story?
I think as people, I'm very optimistic.
I think we should all give it up for that. People.
I'm optimistic about India's people, and I also believe that with whatever its faults, a democratic polity is something that needs to be preserved at all costs, and I hope we retain that democratic polity which our preamble talked about.
Is that something you're concerned about?
I am concerned about that, because I think...
In what ways, sir?
In what way? In the sense that is very important that India's plurilateral character needs to be preserved, maintained, and protected in many ways. Without that, India will not what India has been. So it's very important.
Okay, the buzzer has gone off, and I do have a couple of quick rapid-fire questions for you. Right? Okay. Shall we? All right.
Yeah.
So, I think the first you've already answered, and that is the most underrated finance minister in Indian history.
I think I gave you Yashwant Sinha.
Yashwant Sinha.
I wouldn't have named Mr. Chidambaram, because Mr. Chidambaram is not underrated. He is, probably a little over. Yeah.
Okay. A reform that India needs urgently but hasn't dared to pursue.
Education reform, particularly in the primary and the middle education sector. not so much in the higher education. We have got a new educational regulatory body, but my fear is that you will very soon find another retired civil servant heading that, instead of a proper educator coming and guiding its fortunes. But I think the primary and the secondary education sector requires immediate fixing, which will ensure that India becomes a good place where you can get vocational training and skilling.
All right. One economic myth about India that you hope people would stop believing.
It's a difficult one. I think India will become the third largest economy soon.
But that doesn't change the fortunes on ground.
On the ground, and we still remain an unequal society.
Okay, fair enough. A decade in India's economic journey you would like to most revisit?
1991 to 1999.
Okay. Market forces or state intervention, what defines India's growth story?
A mixed economy, in my view.
Mixed economy.
Right through, even now.
Okay. And if you had to describe India's economy in one word right now?
Vibrant.
Vibrant it is. And your prediction, what will India's most significant economic achievement be by 2047?
If it can bring down the informal workforce in the economy from 90% to 50%.
That would be a great achievement.
Yeah.
AKB, thank you very much, everybody. Yes. May I please now invite Rakesh Khar, editor, Cluster TV9 Network, to kindly felicitate A.K. Bhattacharya.
It's turned off. Now it's on. It needed your magic, sir, to make it on. I'll just take 30 seconds, Shweta. I know we're running late. It's my proud privilege to, felicitate Mr. Bhattacharya, AKB, whom I have been calling for the last many, many decades, on behalf of TV9 Network. But personally, AKB has, mentored me during my early days in economic times, and I call AKB my lifetime boss. So it's indeed a special moment for me. Thank you, AKB.
It's life in full circle for you, Rakesh. Thank you so much, sir.